she gave birth without screaming. Not once. Even when the contractions began pulling at her insides like ropes. Even when blood dripped onto the sheets and the bones of her pelvis cracked from strain. She clenched her teeth, threw back her head, dug her nails into the fabric, but made no sound. The servants gathered by the doors whispered, "She has the endurance of a horse." "A well-bred girl," said one of the elders. The room smelled of sweat, iron, and flowers that were already beginning to wilt. On the window, dried laurel, the tablecloth, with stains that no one would wash out. And in the corner stood he, Count d'Arbonne, old as autumn wine, strong as an oak throne. Face elongated, cheeks sunken, a ring with a green stone on his hand. He looked at her belly like at a shelf where the wine of his lineage should lie. "It's done," said the midwife. "He's born." The count silently approached, looked at the bundle, didn't come closer, only nodded and pronounced, "Well-bred, must record strong womb, worthy of the family name." He left without looking at her, and she remained, on wet linen, with legs spread apart, with emptiness inside where life had been crying out just recently. Her body no longer felt pain, only humming, only silence, like in a bell after the strike. The servants busied themselves with cleaning. They carried out the child, a boy, pink, warm, calm. They didn't even put him to her breast. The midwife said, "No need, no point in getting attached." She didn't object. She lay looking at the ceiling, where a crack in the plaster resembled a branch reaching upward, but not growing. "That's all, my child," whispered one of the women. "Sleep now." But she didn't fall asleep, because someone was still holding her hand. He sat on the floor, to the side. A boy, a youth, about 17 years old, thin, with a pale and frightened face. In his hands, a basin with water in which floated a rag and a rose. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the floor. But his fingers squeezed her hand. Carefully. Not like a man, like one who had touched someone else's suffering for the first time. She didn't know who he was. Maybe a scribe's apprentice. Maybe a servant they forgot to drive away. But his trembling passed to her, and this trembling made it easier. "Aren't you afraid of blood?" she asked. He started, raised his eyes, slowly shook his head. "I'm afraid, but more, I'm afraid of forgetting this face." She didn't understand immediately, or understood, but didn't believe. "Mine?" He nodded. "Yours, like that, when you were silent. This isn't like others." She closed her eyes, wanted to say go, but didn't say it. Because for the first time all day, someone was holding her not as a vessel, but as a person. When he left, the water in the basin had already cooled, and the rose had turned white. And in that silence that remained after his steps, she understood for the first time, not pain would be her life, but observation. And those who watch rather than command would remain in her longer. Chapter 2. The Man Who Shouldn't Have Been Watching. His name was Louis. An ordinary name. There were many like him. Silent, pale, with ink-stained fingers and drooping backs. He didn't serve in the kitchen, didn't haul firewood. He was a scribe. His duty was to record the newborn, in books, in registers, in genealogies, in the future. After each birth, he was called to the threshold of the chambers. The elder handed him a slip where the child's name, weight, date, health notes were written. He nodded, accepted, and disappeared. He never spoke with her, but she knew him from first glance. This was the very youth who had held her hand after the first birth. Now he had grown older, dressed differently, hair slightly longer, voice slightly lower, and his eyes the same, too attentive. She noticed every time he entered with papers, he lingered in the doorway, as if checking something, but actually watching. Not the bed, not the servant, her, and not where everyone was used to looking. Not at the belly, not at the hands. He looked into her eyes. At first, timidly, then longer. He never smiled. But in his gaze was something she hadn't seen in many years, a question. He looked at her like at a person in whom meaning was hidden, not the result of someone else's lust. Once she held his gaze, simply a bit longer than permissible. He blushed, lowered his head, and quickly left. That evening, the book with the birth register fell in the corridor. Ink spilled. Papers were stained. Servants whispered that he was nervous, that he slept poorly, that he often wrote alone at night in a room where no one saw him. One of them claimed to have heard Louis speaking aloud, as if explaining to someone that this woman is not a thing. She learned where he worked. On the second floor, a small room with a narrow window, an ink well made of copper, the family book on thick hinges, and nearby his personal notebook. There he recorded what couldn't be written in official lists. For example, today a girl was born, the 5th. Didn't cry. Opened her eyes immediately. They didn't put her to the breast. The woman didn't move, only breathed. Her lips whispered something, possibly a name, but no one heard. He recorded what everyone forgot. And she felt that she was recorded, not as a body, but as an event. Later, when she would give birth for the 6th time, he would linger at the doors longer than usual, would look directly, and she, for the first time, would nod. Not as a mistress, not as a sufferer, as an equal. And in this moment, a thread would appear between them, invisible, but strong. She didn't yet know what she needed it for, but already felt. One who knows how to see is also capable of remembering. Chapter 3. The Room Without Windows. After the 6th birth, everything changed, not immediately, without words, without announcements. Simply one day, they didn't return her to her former bedroom. Simply led her down a corridor that smelled of damp stone and opened a door to a room without windows. There was a bed, narrow, a table, a bowl of water, and a curtain, not for comfort, but so no one would see how she got up, how she sat, how she drank. They no longer called her by name. They didn't even call her mother. Only the one who gave birth again, or the one who's due soon. Servants entered silently, left quickly. Her body became repetition, function, a series of numbers. Her silence, habit. She lay and counted cracks in the ceiling. They were like dates, confused, similar, but each with its own pain. She remembered what the first ones were called, already with difficulty. In memory, everything merged. Names, cries, the smell of milk, traces on the sheet. But one morning, he appeared. Louis. He entered quietly, without a book, without ink. In his hands, a volume in burgundy binding. "This is for reading," he said, not looking at her face. She didn't answer, only propped herself up on her elbow. "I can leave it, or read to you." She nodded. He opened randomly, read one page. His voice was even, slightly dry, without emotion. But when he reached the phrase, "Those born in darkness hear music before light," he fell silent. Too long. She noticed how his hand trembled. The next day he came again, with a new book. Then, again, and again. He didn't ask how she felt, didn't try to talk about anything except the text. But each time, stayed a bit longer than necessary. Sometimes. Closed the book and sat in silence. And she soon didn't ask him to leave. She began to remember the voice. Not the lines, not the names, the voice. It sounded different at dusk. Deeper, slower. It seemed to calm the walls, or reminded her that beyond them someone was still breathing. Sometimes he brought his own records from his little notebook, not for the register. "I know you shouldn't hear this," he would say, "but I want you to know. Someone sees all this." And he would read the 6th. Too silent. Eyes open. Face foreign. The room is dark, but she sees. She's not looking at the wall, into herself. She said nothing, only placed her hand on the edge of the bed, didn't reach out, didn't call, only gave a sign. Sometimes he touched her fingers, quickly, as if by accident, and left. She wasn't falling in love, wasn't dreaming, but in a room without windows where each day resembles the next, a voice that doesn't lie becomes stronger than air. And at night, when she fell asleep, she didn't dream of a child. Not the Count, not pain, but of a man who read aloud, and each time stayed a bit longer. Chapter 4. Children with a surname, but without faces. 11. That's how many there were by the 4th year. 11 bundles, 11 wet sheets, 11 short cries dying in the corridor, and not one beside her. No one asked if she wanted to look. No one offered to hold them. She didn't remember the infants' faces, only the weight on her belly. The moment when the body became lighter and the soul heavier. Each one was carried out in silence, white cloth, corners folded, eyes wrapped. The door would creak slightly, and silence again. The Count wrote letters, many, with words. The lineage of Darbon continues its ancient movement. 11 new branches ready to strengthen our forest. My chosen woman performs excellently, silently, without whims, with the blessing of blood. He liked the formulation, chosen woman. She wasn't a wife, not a mistress, not even a favorite, simply a function, marked with a golden line, the one who gives branches. She never read these letters, but knew every line. They were whispered by servants, whispered by walls. Lewis recorded dates. In the book, columns. Child's name, weight, father, count, mother, not indicated. Sometimes he tried to add her name, but the senior clerk crossed it out, said, "Not allowed. She's not a surname. She's a mechanism." But Lewis did it his way. In each column where there should be boy or girl, he put a dot in parentheses. Small, not according to regulations, but stubborn. Once someone asked, why? He answered, to remember that there wasn't just a body there, but also someone. They began treating him with suspicion. He became more silent, walked slower, but continued putting dots. Once she asked, "What do you leave in those books?" He froze, looked at her for a long time, then said, "Where there are surnames, I see masks. But you're not a mask, and your children aren't branches. They're sounds, a sound that was, and disappeared." She was silent, but that night for the first time she took the book, ran her fingers over the pages, found the line about the 6th, a dot, small, barely noticeable. "Did he survive?" she asked. "No," Lewis answered. "But he didn't disappear. He remained where you held your hand, along the seam." She nodded and asked no more. And on the 12th time, when her body again treacherously came alive, when she again felt heaviness and convulsions, she herself whispered to Louis, "Put a dot, another one, but bigger, so they know each of them is pain, not heritage." Chapter 5. The Boy Who Wasn't Forgotten. He was born at the beginning of winter, without snow, but with a heavy sky that seemed to hang over the house and not let in light. Not a single bird in the garden, not a single candle that would burn to the end. This was her 13th birth. The contractions lasted longer than usual. Waters broke ahead of schedule. Servants whispered fearfully that this was a bad sign, and she lay calmly, as if waiting not for a child, but for someone she already knew. The room was dark. Only one lamp burned. The midwife muttered prayers. Blood dripped on the floor. Evenly, like a pendulum. Everything went according to the old circle, everything as before, but not him. The boy appeared, without a cry, didn't cry out, didn't flinch, only opened his eyes, and didn't close them. They didn't cover him immediately, didn't carry him away. He lay on her chest, and she looked, not at his face, but into his eyes, and understood. He sees, not just blinking, not just reaching, looking at her, like a witness, not a child. The midwife became alarmed. He's not crying. He won't, she whispered. He's already been in pain, in one of us. Louis entered a minute later. Usually he waited behind the door, but this time, couldn't. He entered without words, saw her, saw the child, and froze. He's looking, she said, for a minute already. Hasn't blinked once. Louis came closer, crouched down, slowly took the infant in his arms. The child didn't protest, wasn't frightened, only shifted his gaze directly into Louis's face. They looked at each other for a long time, not like strangers, as if they recognized each other, as if they recognized too much. She didn't speak, only watched both of them, and suddenly felt a strange thing. Not jealousy, not anxiety, but longing for what would never happen. The midwife stood up. We must take him, by protocol. We already should have. No, said Louis. One more minute. He held the child as if afraid to unclench his fingers, as if the child would fall apart if he looked away, as if there was something in him that couldn't be repeated. He knows who we are, he said. I do too, she answered. A minute later, the infant was taken away, wrapped, carried away in that same white fabric where all her children disappeared. But he had time to remain, in her memory, as the first who didn't cry, in Louis's heart, as something impossible. In the register book, Louis didn't put a dot. He put an asterisk, small, only one, without footnotes. And when the senior clerk asked, "What does this mean?" Louis answered that one of them looked back. Chapter 6. She chooses. Once. The 16th birth breaks her not with body, with time. She no longer counts pain, no longer waits for the end. Everything became viscous, repetitive, like yarn in the hands of a blind old woman. What was once called a body, now an empty vessel covered with sweat and scars. After this birth, she doesn't get up. Servants are silent. The count doesn't visit. The midwife whispers, "It happens. Just exhaustion. It will pass." But she's not exhausted. She's simply empty. For the first time, truly. Louis comes at night. Not as a scribe, not with a book. Simply with a pitcher of water and a bowl. Without request. Without words. Sits nearby, lowers his hands into the water, and carefully, slowly, washes her fingers. She doesn't look at him, only feels. Then, reaches out, easily, smoothly, touches his wrist. He freezes. And then she asks, "Do you think they're all from the same one?" In the room, silence. Only a drop of water falls from his elbow. Only the fabric beneath her is slightly damp. He doesn't answer, only bows his head. runs his fingers along her palm, as if saying, I don't ask, I'm here. He leaves silently, as always. And in the morning, a slip of paper appears at her door, folded in quarters, without signature, without decorations. Only one sentence. You have the right to choose. She reads it more than once, rereads, as if from this the word right would become corporeal, material, as if from it new skin would grow on her. That day she gets up, without help, herself, puts on a dress, thin, dark, hair uncombed, body still trembling, but saps, confident. She goes to the corridor that smells of wax and paper. There, Louis. He's copying lists. Doesn't look. She approaches, places the paper before him. That same slip. Words between them. Choice. In her. Once, she says. Only once. I don't need more. He stands, looks at her, like on the first day, but now, not like at a victim, like at one who decides. Are you sure? She nods. I've already chosen. I just want this not to be at night, not behind a door, not furtively. And he approaches, without fear, without games. He touches her neck, carefully, like cracks on glass. She closes her eyes. This isn't passion, not revenge. This is restoring balance. 2 days later, she's alone again. Louis doesn't come, doesn't write, doesn't look. Only books remain open. But in the register book, a new entry appears. An empty line, without date, without name, and instead of a mark, a word written in charcoal, choice. She reads it before sleep, and for the first time feels, even if this was the only time, it belonged to her. Chapter 7, the 23rd. Her belly rounds again, but not like before. Not smoothly, not lively. It grows heavy like stone, not like fruit. In her body, like a foreign mass without breath, without warmth. She feels it's not growing. She feels, this isn't life. This is punishment. The Count is pleased. He even kisses her hand when they meet, for the first time in all this time. Says she's a golden mare, that the 23rd will be fruit and jubilee. Walks around the house, gives instructions, chooses a name in advance. Says if it's a boy, he'll make him a duke. She doesn't answer, only strokes her belly, but not with tenderness, with indifference, like stroking a stone being dragged up a slope. She no longer counts days, only nights, and all of them identical, without sleep, without movements, without kicks from inside. Louis notices first. You don't feel, she nods, for a long time now. Why didn't you say? What would have changed? He gets up, goes to the doctor, asks him to come immediately, but the Count forbids. Too early, don't interfere, don't frighten her. Let the body do its work. Louis returns, with empty hands and a face pale with anger. She looks at him with the same calm with which she once looked at the first blood on the sheet. And say, you're angry, she says, but I'm not. Strange? He sits at her feet, takes her hand, doesn't speak for a long time, then whispers, you shouldn't have reached the 23rd. She smiles, for the first time in many months. I didn't reach it. I was brought to it. Labor begins in the middle of the night. The room is dark, windows closed. No screaming, no panic. Only her breathing, even like a sleeping person's. Servants don't make it in time. The midwife arrives already at the end. The child is born, silently, without breath, without movement. The midwife wants to scream. Louis stands in the doorway. He can't breathe. And she smiles, not brightly, Not wildly, but freely. That's all, she says. All. Her voice, not the voice of a victim. Voice, as if water found its level, as if something ended. The Count learns in the morning. He's furious. Shouts that she's cursed, that this is shame. Orders to rewrite the genealogy, remove the 23rd. Pretend there were 22. Louis refuses. He opens the book and writes, 23rd dead, but didn't disappear. He was the one who removed the yoke from her. The Count demands to burn the record. Louis leaves. He's no longer seen in the house. They say he left on foot, without belongings, only with one book in his hands, and with her in his head. And she remains. No longer a woman, not a vessel, but simply one who finally stopped. Servants say, after those labors, she never cried again and never became pregnant again. Chapter 8. A name written in ink. After the 23rd, she doesn't return to herself, because now she is herself. No longer a servant, not a mother, not a body in the birth schedule. No one touches her anymore without permission, not even with a glance. She almost doesn't eat, only drinks water. Sometimes tea with honey, left silently by the door. Her body weakens, but her hands grow strong, because now she writes, at first, briefly, then, at length, then, with pauses between words, as if inserting breath into the text. Writes on old papers, in the margins of books, on the backs of registers. Everything that was silence turns into ink. They bring her an inkwell and quills. Who? No one admits it. But she knows. Louis. He doesn't enter, doesn't appear. But every week, new sheets, new ink, a new knife for quills, without signature, without sound. She writes for herself, or for him, or for those she didn't manage to hold. Once she reaches for the bottom shelf of the cabinet and takes out an old, almost forgotten scrap of paper. There, a date, weight, gender, and an empty name. The 13th, the one who looked, who didn't cry, who remembered. And she writes a name, not her own, not the Count's, not Louis's, a name, real, simple. 4 letters. She didn't invent it. She carried it within herself, like him, and places the sheet in the book, that very one, where the Count ordered a cross to be placed. She doesn't cross out. She adds. The next day, Louis comes. For the first time in a long while, he doesn't ask, only extends his hand. She places the sheet in his palm. He reads, holds his breath, and doesn't exhale. Simply looks, then nods, takes the sheet, and leaves. 3 days later, he returns with a new book, empty, only on the first page, born not for lineage, but for memory. She takes it, writes in it all those she remembers, in her own way, without dates, without fathers, only names, only feelings, only words no one demanded. And on the last page, silence, a clean sheet. She places a locket there, small, with an engraved circle. Inside, a letter. Not L, not G. The letter of her name. Finally, a name. Servants no longer call her anything, simply go around her, lower their eyes. And in the corridor between 2 cabinets, Louis secretly builds the book into the wall, like a brick, like a heart. The book becomes lighter, but their hearts heavier, because finally what they always feared to name is written. Chapter 9. In the dresser, a locket. She disappears as she lived, without sound, without dramas, screams, explanations. In the morning, a servant brings the breakfast tray, as always, places it by the door, as always. But from inside, silence. Not the kind after sleep. Different. Final. They open the door only by evening. In the room, order. Bed made. Ink washed, papers folded. Everything in place. Only one thing not in place. The dresser is ajar. There, under a stack of clothes, they find a locket. Dark silver, smooth as water. On the outside, nothing. No coat of arms, no letter. Inside, a lock of hair. Not infant, woman's, ash-colored, wound in a spiral. And a phrase, engraved finely but confidently, "I carried all of you, but only one of you looked at me as if I were alive." The servant who found the locket doesn't show it immediately, carries it to the count's office. He's already ill, in fever, lost, abandoned even by doctors. They say the 23rd undermined something in him that's not visible in the mirror. Awareness. The count takes the locket, holds it in his hand for a long time, and suddenly falls without saying a word. In the morning, they find him dead, with the locket in his fingers. Face. Distorted not by pain, by understanding. His body is buried quickly, without unnecessary speeches. The house is silent. The woman's name is not spoken. Her room is closed. Servants are dismissed. They don't speak of the past. Only Louis remains. He doesn't appear in the dining hall, doesn't write in the lineage book, only once enters her chambers. Takes one thing, the book, that very one, where the asterisk is next to the 13th, where the name without date, where the inscription, born, not for lineage, but for memory. He leaves for a monastery without farewells, without purpose, only with the book. The abbot accepts him without questions, gives him a small cell, a quill, a candle. "Record," he says, "everything that requires silence." Louis writes about her, not as suffering, but as the first who called things by their names, who left no will, but left a thought. And in the monastery library, between lists of Gospels and Harvest Chronicles, lies a book without a cover, with a single title, "The Woman for Whom One Glance Was Enough." And on the last page, a locket is glued, that very one, with the lock of hair and the inscription, which now no one dares to read aloud. Chapter 10, Woman Without Date of Death. She disappeared, and from that moment began to live. Not as a body, not as a page in a genealogy, but as a trace that's impossible to erase, even if you cross out the name. In the Count's house, children were never born again, rooms emptied, servants changed, wallpaper faded, fabric on curtains thinned like old skin. And about her died, they didn't speak. No one, not once, because everyone remembered too well. In official lists, in church books, in the records of the Darbonne lineage, her name is crossed out. Everywhere where mother stood, now a dash. In Louis's register, an empty line between the 22nd and the final mark. But in the monastery library, among old manuscripts and donation lists, one notebook is kept, without binding. Paper, yellow, ink, faded. Text, uneven with drops of wax, without title. But the monks call it the Quiet Book. Inside, a list. 22 names, numbers to the side, weight, date, and one, without number, without gender, without date of birth. Only a short phrase. The living was born only once. Everything else, repetition. The line seems to breathe, as if not written, exhaled, and beneath it, another inscription, almost invisible. in French, in small letters drawn with pressure. She was the 24th, not the 23rd, not a mother, not a concubine, but the next. Not one who gave life, but one who was born herself for the first time. Once a young monk asked the old librarian, "Who is she?" He closed the book. Slowly. "Don't ask. She's not a name. She's a choice." And in the silence, where between lines are kept not dates, but will, her breath remains. Without monument, without body, without tombstone, but in every glance of a woman who will one day say, "Now, I decide who lives in me."